Snow drifted through the cracks of the window as Daniel Price knelt beside his sleeping daughter, tucking his worn jacket around her small body. The apartment was cold, bitterly cold, and the old radiator had given up hours ago. But Daniel didn't care. He watched Maya's soft breaths fog the air, her tiny fingers clutching a stuffed rabbit missing one ear. In that dim, broken room, surrounded by peeling wallpaper and flickering light, a father's love burned brighter than the winter outside. Upstairs, behind a half-closed curtain, Grace Hamilton watched through her window, tears glinting in her tired eyes. She had rented to dozens of tenants over the years, but never had she seen love like this. She told herself she was just checking on the building, but night after night she found herself drawn back to that same window, watching the man who had nothing, yet gave everything. When Daniel first turned the key to the flat, he could hardly believe it opened. The door creaked like an old ship, the hallway smelled faintly of damp wood, and the wallpaper was a faded yellow from decades of neglect. But to him, it was more than four walls. It was safety, something he and Maya hadn't had in months. He lifted his daughter into his arms as she yawned, her hair tangled from nights spent sleeping in the back seat of his car. "It's not much, kiddo," he whispered, forcing a smile, "but it's ours." Maya grinned, her front tooth missing. "It's perfect, Daddy. Can I pick my room?" Daniel nodded, pretending not to see the holes in the floorboards or the cracked ceiling. He set down the only box they had left, a mix of toys, clothes, and memories. He had sold nearly everything after losing his job at the shipping yard when the company went bankrupt. What little he made from doing odd jobs barely kept food on the table. Upstairs, Grace Hamilton stood outside the apartment door, clipboard in hand, listening quietly. She'd rented this place for half the normal price, mostly out of pity. But as she listened to the little girl's laughter echoing down the corridor, she felt something shift inside her. She couldn't quite name it yet, only that she couldn't bring herself to walk away. The days passed slowly in the old building. Daniel spent his mornings searching for work, leaving Maya with the elderly tenant next door, Mrs. Collins, who had taken an instant liking to her. He patched up walls, replaced bulbs, even helped repair leaking pipes for other tenants. Not for money, but because he couldn't stand watching people struggle when he knew how that felt. Grace saw everything. She lived on the top floor, behind a door no one ever knocked on. She'd inherited the building from her late father, but rarely mingled with tenants. Still, each time Daniel fixed something or shoveled the snow outside, she'd watch from her window, a steaming cup of tea growing cold in her hand. One evening, she saw Daniel return from a long day, hands raw from cold, eyes heavy, only to sit with Maya on the floor, drawing pictures with crayons. The electricity had flickered out again, but he made it feel like an adventure. "Look, Maya, stars inside our house," he joked, pointing to the candlelight dancing on the ceiling. Grace's chest ached at the sight. The building was failing, pipes freezing, the roof leaking, but somehow Daniel's small acts of warmth made it feel alive again. She told herself she was just a landlord. Yet every night she found herself standing by that window, watching the little family downstairs, wondering when she'd last felt something so real. Winter deepened, and the cold bit harder than ever. Daniel's odd jobs dried up, and he began skipping meals so Maya could eat. His coat grew thinner, his hands rougher. Still, he smiled every morning for her. Maya started coughing one night, a dry, rattling sound that echoed through the hollow apartment. Daniel wrapped her in blankets and boiled water for steam. He didn't have money for a doctor, but he hummed softly, rocking her until she fell asleep. Grace watched the lights flicker in their flat, her stomach twisting with guilt. She knew the heating system had failed again. She'd been meaning to replace it, but with costs piling up, she'd delayed it for months. That night, she couldn't sleep. At dawn, she slipped downstairs quietly and left a small box outside their door. Inside, 2 packets of soup, cough medicine, and a hand-knit scarf. She didn't sign her name. When Daniel found it, he looked up and down the hallway, puzzled. "See, Maya?" he whispered with a faint smile. "The world still has kind people." Grace, hidden behind her door, pressed her hand to her mouth, fighting back tears. A few days later, Daniel got a call for a construction job interview. It was his first real chance in months. But the timing couldn't have been worse. Maya's school had closed early because of the snowstorm. With no one to watch her, he bundled her up and took her along. They trudged through the icy streets, Daniel holding her hand tightly. When they reached the bus stop, he saw the sign, "Service suspended due to weather." He knelt in the snow, defeated. "I can't lose this one, Maya." She looked up at him, eyes full of trust. "You won't, Daddy. You're the best builder ever." Grace had seen them leave earlier. Something inside her told her to follow. When she spotted them stranded at the stop, she pulled up in her old Mini Cooper and rolled down the window. "Need a lift?" Daniel froze. "Miss Hamilton?" "Call me Grace," she said softly. "Get in, before you both freeze." The car heater wheezed as Grace drove them through the blinding snow. Daniel held Maya close, rubbing her hands to keep her warm. "You didn't have to," he murmured. Grace kept her eyes on the road. "You help everyone in that building. Maybe someone should return the favor." At the interview building, Grace parked and turned to Daniel. "I'll wait," she said simply. "You might need a lift back." Daniel blinked in surprise. "You really don't have to—" She interrupted gently. "Go, show them who you are." He smiled faintly and stepped out, leaving Maya in Grace's care. As the car filled with silence, Grace looked at the little girl beside her, wide-eyed, curious, clutching her stuffed rabbit. "You're kind," Maya said suddenly. "Daddy says kind people make the world less cold." Grace turned away quickly, hiding her tears. Daniel returned 2 hours later, his expression unreadable. He slid into the passenger seat and stared out the window for a long moment. "Well?" Grace asked softly. "They said they'll call," he muttered, "which usually means they won't." She opened her mouth to comfort him, but stopped. Words felt useless against that kind of quiet defeat. Instead, she reached into her coat and handed him a thermos. "Tea," she said. "Hot. Helps." He smiled weakly, took a sip, and exhaled. "You have no idea how much this means." Grace didn't reply, but as she looked at him, tired, worn, yet still gentle, she realized she did. Over the next few weeks, something unspoken began to grow between them. Grace would drop by for inspections and end up sharing tea in the kitchen. Daniel, embarrassed by the apartment's state, tried to fix everything before she arrived. One afternoon, she found him mending the radiator with duct tape. "That's not going to hold," she said, amused. "Neither am I," he chuckled, "but I'm trying." For the first time in years, Grace laughed, a real, unguarded laugh. It startled them both. Maya peeked out from her room, smiling shyly. "Daddy made you laugh." Grace knelt beside her. "He's good at that," she whispered. As winter began to fade, Daniel received devastating news. The construction company he de-interviewed with had gone bankrupt before even opening. His savings, what little remained, were gone. Rent was overdue again. He stared at the notice pinned to his door, his heart sinking. He didn't want Maya to see it, so he tore it down quietly. But Grace already knew. She'd seen the rent records. She tried to convince herself to stay firm, to treat him like any other tenant. Yet she couldn't eat. That night, she wrote out a letter forgiving 3 months' rent and slipped it under his door. Daniel found it in the morning, his hands trembling. "Who does something like this?" he whispered. He went upstairs to thank her, but Grace didn't answer the door. Instead, he left a small note in return. "Thank you. From both of us. I'll repay every penny someday." When she read it, her throat tightened. She didn't want repayment. She just wanted him and Maya to have a chance. That evening, she watched them again through her window. They were baking cookies on a small camping stove, laughing when the dough burned. Grace realized she hadn't smiled like that in years. Her own flat was spotless, warm, but empty. No laughter, no love. The building she once saw as a burden had suddenly become a home because of them. One morning, Maya knocked on Grace's door holding a crayon drawing. "It's you, me, and Daddy," she said proudly. "You're part of our family now." Grace's heart nearly broke. She took the drawing, tears welling up. "Thank you, sweetheart," she whispered. That simple act, a child's drawing, changed everything. Grace started fixing the building properly. New heaters, repaired lights, even repainting the hallways. Daniel helped without being asked, and the tenants began noticing the difference. The place slowly came back to life. But just as things were improving, tragedy struck. Daniel was working part-time at a nearby repair shop when scaffolding collapsed. He wasn't badly hurt, but his arm was fractured, enough to cost him his job again. When Grace visited him at the hospital, Maya clung to her side, frightened. "He'll be okay," Grace promised, though she wasn't sure who she was trying to convince, Maya or herself. Daniel tried to smile through the pain. "Guess I'm no good at staying out of trouble." "You're good at everything that matters," Grace whispered, brushing his hand lightly. While Daniel recovered, Grace took care of things. She brought groceries, repaired leaks, even helped Maya with homework. The building, once falling apart, began to feel like a community again. One night, after tucking Maya into bed, Daniel looked at Grace. "You've done more for us than I can ever repay." Grace met his eyes. "You already have. You reminded me what it means to care." Silence filled the room. Not awkward, but warm, like the first breath of spring. As the months passed, Daniel's arm healed, and he began working again, this time for a construction company owned by one of Grace's contacts. The flat that once felt like a burden now echoed with laughter and hope. Maya grew close to Grace, often spending afternoons in her flat, helping bake or water plants. Grace had never had children. She'd spent years hiding behind responsibility. But now, her life felt full in a way she'd never imagined. One evening, the three of them sat by the window, watching the sunset over Liverpool's rooftops. The city was bathed in gold, the old building glowing softly in the light. "Remember when it used to be freezing in here?" Maya said, giggling. Daniel laughed. "Now it's the warmest place in the world." Grace smiled. "Because it's filled with love," she whispered. Spring turned to summer. Flowers bloomed in the courtyard. Laughter drifted through open windows, and for the first time, Grace threw a small gathering for all the tenants. Daniel grilled food, Maya ran around with the other kids, and Grace stood back, watching them, her heart full. Later that night, when everyone had gone, Daniel approached her quietly. "Grace, you saved us." She shook her head. "No, Daniel. You and Maya saved me." They stood in silence for a long time, the city lights shimmering below. Then, slowly, his hand found hers. Not out of romance, but gratitude, connection, and something deeper that words couldn't touch. A year later, the building was unrecognizable, bright, clean, and full of life. Daniel now managed repairs full-time, and Maya had started school nearby. Grace had turned the top floor into a community room for tenants, dedicating it to her late father, who had once built homes for families in need. During the ceremony, Maya tugged her sleeve. "Can we call this place home now?" Grace smiled, tears in her eyes. "It's always been home, sweetheart. We just needed each other to find it." As the evening sky deepened over Liverpool, Daniel stood by the window where it all began. The same cracked pane now repaired, the same view that once looked hopeless. He watched Maya asleep on the couch, her stuffed rabbit beside her. Grace stood beside him, holding 2 mugs of tea. "It's strange," he murmured, "how kindness starts small and somehow changes everything." Grace nodded, her eyes glistening. "You showed me that." Outside, the first snowflakes of a new winter began to fall, but this time the apartment was warm, alive, and filled with love. And though neither said it aloud, they both knew. The broken apartment had healed them all.